The song you're hearing is from Noah Dean Jordan's latest album, I Was Once a River, released in September 2023, played entirely with the requinto instrument. This track is called Rock Creek 2. Today, we go on the podcast to explore some of Noah Dean Jordan's instruments in a colorful microtonal tour.
I can kind of go through a bit of the process that I've been on with working with sort of building and learning to build instruments and tuning them differently in sort of the projects. This one here was the one that I used for mostly this one, except for one track was on that last album, I Was Once a River. So this one, it's based on the requinto jarocho, which usually have 4 or 5 strings, and it's like a melody instrument. So the main idea of this one was to have like the just diatonic scale, but then add in intervals of 7, so like the 7/6 and 7/5 and 7/4, to get an idea of how those sounds worked together in a just intonation setting, because I got to the point where I felt like if I can't hear all of this on an acoustic instrument, then how am I going to predict how to build music in a more complex environment? So I thought, you know what, I'm going to try and experiment with this. I threw in a couple 13 limit intervals just for fun, because the higher range, throwing in a 13/7, I thought maybe instead of the 15/8, why not? Maybe it will help me hear something else in terms of that.
You said 13/7, and since I didn't know my 13 limit, I definitely frantically looked it up on the Zen Harmonic Wiki, and it's about 1,072 cents. So it's kind of a neutral seventh.
Yeah, it's like it almost works as a major seventh if there isn't anything else, and because in the end there wasn't going to be room for the another major seventh. I guess maybe there would have been, but I was still trying to figure out what the smallest comfortable fret size would be, depending on the range of the instrument.
Oh yeah.
Getting closer to the octave, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and then in this one I tried out quite a small one. I think that was the 11/6 and 13/7, because this one I wanted to get the whole, I guess, like the whole O-tonal series of the 11 and 13, like all of the 11/10, 11/9, 11/8, and same with 13.
Yes.
So that was kind of the idea of that. See if I could do an experiment of comparing two different, I guess, harmonic ideas. I don't know what you would even call that, because it's like it's not quite an 11 or 13 limit system. It kind of is, but it's not the full system. It's like segments of the harmonic series that are related to those numbers.
Like using small segments of harmonic series instead of like trying to create n limit systems and then taking notes from those. I'd love to hear a 13/7 interval with a 9/7, like in the chord, because then you'd get like a 13/9 thing going on. Looks like 13/9 is 637 cents about.
Okay, so here we go. That's a nice sound. It's a big reach. That's one of the things that I've been trying to figure out for these instruments, is how to almost know ahead of time what different ways I'd like to tune the strings and what different intervals will let them come out. Because I'm sure there's a way to get The 9/7 on it's tricky because I don't have the only base 7 intervals are like the denominator 7 would be the 13/7 and the 9/7, I believe. I don't think I got any other ones
Right.
that fit in, so it'd be nice to have another one to hear that chord. But
Yeah. I was definitely, as you were playing, thinking about asking you, of course, about the playability of the instrument and how it works when you have just fretting, but the fretting is the same across each string. Like, I saw that you were reaching so much there. Do you find that in the music that you usually play that you're having to reach things that are a little bit crazy in order to play what you want, or do you let the instrument itself kind of guide you into writing particular music? Uh, what's your approach there, and how much have you encountered this playing issue that comes from unequal fretting?
um for the most part, I've kind of stayed in kind of registers at a time. Like that's actually the first time that I've really tried to hear that interval, just because I didn't even realize it as being potentially playable. But I'll often stay within. So a lot more I find that I'll kind of go through just kind of melodic ideas and stay within something and experiment with just put some of the new sounds in there and just like stay with those sounds for a while and hear how they start to connect with other sounds. Like I really like the sound of how like the major second goes with the like the 7/6, like that.
Yeah.
And we call it a septimal tone, like those areas between the second and the third is something I've been thinking of because it's weird with the diatonic basis of thinking in terms of 7 notes per scale and calling them as such. And I was like, well, how do you call that? Because it's not really a second and it's not really a third. It's kind of both sometimes, but it's also kind of neither one. It's like a weird transition point. It's interesting. But anyways, I really like how that sounds both like going to the 6/5 or even below, in whether it's from the 1, the 4, or the 5, or like that same progression. And just getting really into where that note is and how it can give us other sounds.
So melodically, you're talking about the 7/6 approaching the 6/5.
Yeah, or from the other way, from like the 9/8 approaching the 7/6, like
Yeah.
all of those tones kind of together. And I wish I could have the 8/7 as well to see that whole kind of descending series, but um it gets small right around there. But
Yeah. Neat. So how many of those instruments do you have? I see there are some other ones in the room.
so this is the next one. This one was based on, well, that last one was kind of between the 5 limit and 7 limit intervals. This one was between 11 and 13 to try to see where that would get me.
Is
Let's
it
see.
like a Yuki kind of?
Yeah, they're called requintos. They're a cousin of the ukulele. I guess they both came through means of Spain and Portugal. It's a descendant of the Baroque guitar, so it would have arrived in Veracruz, Mexico in the 14, 15, 1600s probably.
Yeah.
It's still kind of in early tuning days.
Ah, fascinating. So, then the music we're hearing, I know you've got a new album that I was listening to because I support your Patreon account. The Requinto album.
Uh-huh.
And so is that all just Requintos?
Yeah, that's almost all this one that I was just playing, except for I think the last track goes on to this one. I was working with Spencer Hargreaves or Terry Maple, who was doing like the track selection and the mixing and the mastering. So I'd sent him the archive because I had been recording them for like a year or two, just I don't know, improvising, turning the recorder on every once in a while when I felt like it was going somewhere good, or that I felt like I'll turn it on, I'll play for a little bit, just almost like an audio diary that I could keep over time. So I was going through them a bunch, and then Spencer really liked the tracks. So I said, you know what? If you want to make this into an album, choose your favorite ones, put the order. It would be cool just to hear how you would make a collection of these. So, anyways, he thought that he was going to do one with one and one with the other, but one of these kind of uh snuck in a bit, which is kind of cool. It gives a different sound. So I'll try to play this one a little bit.
It's a very free, creative process. Oh, I'm hearing that one a little bit better, I think, for some reason.
That's good. This one has been a bit. got a bit of a different tuning on the strings today. I think these all got to be like a root and then a fourth up from there. Usually I try to have like a root 4, or root 5. This one got strung a bit differently when I started, because usually there'll be more nylon strings, or it will be tuned kind of more in, I don't know, like C, D, G, C, like having kind of that kind of structure. But with the strings that I chose, it kind of sat more in having a two roots thing, and then I thought, you know what, I'll just leave it there until I restring it. So
Yeah.
it's about time to restring it. They're getting a bit rusty. It had a season away from me, but it's I also really like with some of these that sometimes you leave it for a bit and it kind of changes the tuning on its own, or one thing will kind of go to a third, or something else will happen. Like it won't really go out of tune, but it'll go to something else, and then you tune it, and then it's like, this is a bit of a different pattern, and then starting to play it, and then it has a different sound than you would have before. So it's I kind of like that mystery, and I first encountered it on the piano, where I don't know, you have a piano that's tuned in a way that you don't know what it's going to be, so you kind of have to almost guess. It's not really like gambling, but it's like if you're improvising, it's like when you hit a note, you can guess what note it's going to be, then it's either going to be what you imagine or not. So if it's what you imagine, then you keep going as if it's what you thought. But if it's not what you imagined, then you have to kind of, I don't know, do like an Ornette Coleman and pretend it was what you imagined, and roll with it. Be like, nope, that was what I meant to do. Let's resolve this to somewhere that sounds good, or go into it even further and be like, no, I'm gonna keep laying it on that note that sounded kind of weird at first, but if I play it enough, then it's gonna enter into the dynamic. So
What a
um
great description of improvisational choice. I always find that if I make some kind of unintentional um hit on a note and it doesn't belong in the structure, like it's outside, I almost it's hard to say whether it's going to be likable or not. Like I feel like it's so subjective and it depends on the context of the music so heavily as well. Sometimes I'll do that and I'll really wish that I had done something else, and sometimes I'll do that and I'll want to hammer on that note because I think it's a great addition to the texture or whatever it is. Now, if you're talking about improvising on piano then and having this feeling, are you talking about the Creo pianos or just like learning piano in general?
the choreo pianos, at least at first, because that was one of the first times that I had that experience. Actually, probably the first time working with that, and especially because some of them were out of tune from their other tuning. But really, especially with the 18 tone piano, because it was always unexpected. There was almost nothing that would be there, and it was in tune with itself in a really nice way, that it was kind of like I don't know, like a well-tempered version of it, because there were some that were like the fifth were almost right in tune. Like they weren't quite there, but there was definitely a range of really wild fifths and quite nice sweet sounding fifths. So it's I don't know, from looking at the structure of 18, there's definitely you're not gonna find near perfect fifths in there in anything. So having that was actually really a really cool addition to the piano, having somewhere in between those kind of ideas of tuning. And I wish I would have done more of actually, maybe at some point I did a measurement, because they asked me to kind of do an analysis of the pianos to see what they needed. So maybe somewhere I did, like, to figure out exactly how it was tuned, but it would have been interesting to see what the tuning of that was at the time. I guess with the recordings and Melodyne, or like an after, can still figure it out. But um I guess I was content that it sounded how it did, and was more interested in continuing to play it than to see that. But um But yeah, that was one of the first times. And then later, retuning pianos on my own. Like I did one in 15 and then other ones in some just intonation sets. So that was a similar thing as well, even though at some point you kind of know what to expect if you're used to the tuning a bit. But once you start going and the structure of the keyboard is a bit different, sometimes you're just kind of going for something and then going for it. Same with the 17 tone Rhodes that they got retuned. That was interesting too because there was 3 different registers to accommodate the structure. So there was like 2 different gaps that had like a fifth or something because there was no without starting to cut things pretty severely, I wasn't going to change the harp length.
Right. What inspired retuning a piano to 15 tone? That's been something I've been really interested in for obvious profile picture related reasons.
I guess it was a tuning that I had used a bunch before with Spencer and Reddick Sultan. And that was one of the first microtonal instruments I had was one of the 15 tone guitars that Ron Sword had refretted, which I thought was such an interesting guitar. Spencer has it now. Because it was like the frets on the side were still kind of sharp. It was one of like the first frettings that Ron had done, and it was like like a $50 or $100 Craigslist guitar. But it had such like a nice sound to it, and it felt good to play. Like it didn't feel like you were playing a great instrument, but it never failed to deliver and having a nice tuning and a nice sound. So it had a lot of personality, that instrument. So I ended up playing it quite a lot. And so with retuning a piano and trying to find what that was, it seemed like that was about the limit of to where the piano could be retuned without something bad happening. Like it could maybe be stretched to 16 and keeping it chromatic, but at 15 it was because you'd have to drop the pitch quite a bit, and because you wouldn't want to raise the lower notes too much, you could, I don't know, depending on how brave you were, but like raising the lower ones more than a semitone or a whole tone, then if that one breaks, then maybe you're gonna get hurt, or maybe the piano's gonna suffer from a big shock. So everything kind of had to get dropped down in pitch to keep it chromatic, but then the higher notes, because every octave you're kind of like dropping down 3 notes. So at the highest ones, you're dropping down like, I don't know, a perfect fifth on those tiny strings. So all of a sudden the top strings don't really get a sound. So I kind of found that there was 3 registers as well, like the register that sounded like a piano. Then there was like I called it the bell register that kind of had like a bell kind of tone. And then the really loose one sounded almost like a mallet percussion, like a dead marimba. It was like hitting a rock or hitting a randomly tuned piece of wood, which was cool as well. I got a nice diverse selection of sounds on the piano, but I couldn't push it anymore. There's a few times where I tried to tune a piano to 13 and it stayed for a bit, but I wasn't patient enough with the tuning to keep doing the fine tunings. I'd play it a bit and it's like, I don't know, I'm not sure what to do with this tuning. I'm not tuned to how it's sounding. At some point I'd like to come back to that, but I felt that it's like I need to figure out something else to latch onto with this tuning before doing that. It also takes a really long time to retune a piano and then to fine tune it and then to let it sit and then to tune it again so it's gonna stay. So I would like to try that again at some point when I have the time with a piano. That being said, I realized that working with different 12 tone sets with just intonation from retuning sets in 12, that there were so many ways that without hurting the piano, I could just like, what, there's going to be 12 notes anyways, and you could extend it to 13 if I wanted, but having having the octave repetition and that kind of visual, the visual guide was nice. And I was like, oh, I can experiment with all of these things here as well. And then the piano, I don't know, pretty easily you can bring it back to something similar. Whereas it took quite a long time to bring back from 15 to something that was less than that. It was the piano really needed to re-stretch.
It's surprising that you could accomplish that kind of stretch in 15. Like, it seems like the implication is almost that you shouldn't even go past 12 notes per octave, even if they're unequal in some way. So you're saying in on the 15 tone piano, then you got like chromatic pitches in 15, so just like a linear mapping, like going out from a note. And man, it changes the timbre a lot, huh? That's I wonder if people consider that valid, because if you use some microtuning techniques on instruments, of course it can change what's going on. I've experienced this with the cork trick that I use on some of my microtonal guitars to change the equal temperament number, basically. Even though the action will get way too high about past the octave, and mistuning will happen as well. But with electric guitars, this since there's a greater distance from the pickup, it'll really diminish the volume and like quality of the note coming through like an amp or anything. So it's a bit it alters the timbre of the instrument as well in a similar way that you did. Are the Creo pianos, could you explain to our listeners what the Creo pianos are like on the inside if they're using 18 tone but they're not just a normal 12 piano, like on the inside, like the strings aren't normal. What's the pattern that is being followed there inside?
So they were actually with all of them were with custom made harps inside. So it's the key layout is like a normal piano, but inside the arc to accommodate the string lengths is different because they have the whole like 16 piano collection from the whole tone piano. I guess there must be a 12 tone one. I don't know if it was there, but then there's two 18 tone pianos. One's the grand piano and one's an upright piano. And then they have the 24 and 30 and 36 up to 96, the idea of dividing the whole tone, the magic 200 cents into a whole bunch of different parts. So each of them had a custom harp made inside to accommodate stringing them in that way. And then I guess like the string gauges, because in the end the last few pianos are all basically one big long octave. So it's so really the 18 tone one was the one that I found the most playable in that sense. Also because it was a grand piano and it was well taken care of and it was well tuned, that it sounded really, really great. The quarter tone one was it was all right, but it wasn't the most comfortable to play that on a piano with like the double octave. I really liked the 30 tone one as well. That one kind of retained a nice tuning. I did some recordings on that, kind of doing the double 15.
Yeah.
And I did find that it was interesting keeping the same keyboard shape because the symmetry still allowed you to have a good guide. I remember one of my piano teachers, Lisa Miller, recommended to me that for the piano I should think of it in terms of shapes, or like instead of thinking of like, oh, this is C and G, whether thinking of it like from 1 to 12 or just in shapes, that I could kind of detach myself from thinking tonally in the instrument. And I realized that applies really good with using a microtonal keyboard that still has the 12 shape, because you can take one shape that okay, this is a major chord, this is a seventh chord, and then that shape you already know how to modulate it into any position on the piano with like standard piano technique. So then you just start to get into the idea that this three-tone shape, it's not a minor third anymore. Now it's a whole tone. And it's like, okay, so now playing like a diminished seventh chord going up, now that's the whole tone scale. or now playing a whole tone scale, now that's a 9-tone equal scale. So you can make all of these different symmetries based on techniques and like visualizations that you already know, and then apply it to that as well. And it's interesting too, thinking of the different third tone tunings. So like 16, 17, 18, and 19 all kind of have the idea that the whole tone has three parts. So all of those on a piano, that same idea of like the minor third shape going up, that's your basis for the whole tone. So maintaining that kind of symmetry can also really help with guiding a piano and changing tunings, and really not having to change the technique drastically to understand how to play in a different tuning on a piano. So I think that there's a lot of things that can be interested in there, because I've noticed there's been a lot of work on different types of symmetrical keyboards or isomorphic keyboards, or different ways of accommodating those ideas, which I think is super, super cool. Because at some point, I don't know, like with the 24, there's just no way that it's going to work very well on the standard piano shape. However, there's a lot that can be said for trying to maintain, I don't know, centuries of technique that have been based around that kind of idea, and figuring out how to accommodate those two ideas, and especially in a way that can still exist on an acoustic instrument. At least for my own interest, to have an acoustic piano that could play comfortably in a tuning that has 30 plus notes would be super, super incredible.
Yeah, I think that's the big disadvantage to the isomorphic keyboards is you've always got to go through the computer and you're always playing an electronic instrument. And there's something about acoustic instruments I think that's just so human, you know, it's so real. It's slightly imperfect in that way that you notice and it affects the music positively. Really like 15 for this reason actually. Um I feel like if you redo the order of keys on a keyboard, and so you don't have the 12 layout that you usually have, but if you have linear layout of 15, uh, the one I have is my pictures, of course, 8 white keys and 7 black in one big island.
uh,
Like that's kind of I have pretty average hand size. I'm like about average, slightly on the small side. Um, I think it's about the widest you can reach to really get an octave, like on that sort of MIDI keyboard. Like you can, but it takes like real effort. I think with my hand size, and so it's a really special tuning for that reason. Similarly to how you mentioned that 16 and 17, 18, and 19 are special because they split the whole tone in the particular way that they do. And then in 15, if you apply that same logic and go up every 4 notes, like you play a fully diminished seventh chord in a 12th tet layout, you get a 5 tet,
uh,
which is kind of exciting. That people can apply these things this way. It's great that the Korea piano tunings also are so unusual. Like they're not really, they're divisions of the whole tone, right? And they're not things that are trying to approximate ratios necessarily. It's just this the field of possibilities. You almost get these tuning systems that are completely underexplored because they're overshadowed by neighbors that get close to ratio-based tunings, such as 30 and 32 being overshadowed by the massive popularity of 31. And I assume that if someone were writing music for these pianos, potentially they could use some scordatura to instruct the player what to do, but it'd be interesting to also see notation that would correspond to the tunings at hand. I'll bet since there are divisions of the whole tone everywhere, you'd probably want to notate things maybe like spectralists would, or people who divide 12 into further parts so that you're mostly using like a 12 tone equal tempered system, but it just has more pieces to it because of arrows and things like that.
Curio used like a numeric notation, which I think it's quite challenging for those pianos as well. But I mean, it's one way to communicate it. Another one is, like you said, like using the whole tone or like the 12 tone basis as that, and then using divisions from that. I think would be almost more like a whole tone division, because then every second piano isn't going to have the 12 tone structure. You'll have like a whole tone scale structure, and I've thought about that before, like for notating 18, or for that matter, I was going to mention something about 15, but say for 18, if you notate it as if you had, say, like a 6-line staff or even a 3-line staff, and then there's six nominals, and then your whole scale is just like the flat, the natural, and the sharp, and then it's kind of like an atonal based notation, but with a minimal amount of nominals and tones, and actually quite a small staff size to accommodate for an actually a larger amount of tunings. Same with 15, I imagine, because I usually think of it in terms of like the three fives kind of crossing over. So if I was to build a keyboard or even like a marimba to play in 15, I would want to see how it feels to have like almost a 3-layered piano that had just like five and then five and then five, maybe without like the black keys, but just like one layer, one layer, one layer, or even something like the black keys that was like, I don't know, something that would go up. Because for me as well, I think that on the 12-tone piano to hit that the octave with one hand, only on like, I think from the C to the E flat I can do it, but I think from say the D to the F maybe not. And then I think from C sharp to E, I think that's like the ninth works, but I think going up to the 10th, it's depends on the key. So it's like right at that limit for my hand size to be able to play the octave in that tuning.
Yeah.
But I think that having that kind of layer structure can help as well, because at least for me, I know that there's like the porcupine tunings and structures that work with 15, but I really like I've really cemented the three interlocking five ones, and like the Blackwood kind of tuning, like
Right.
the note scales that are like for me the major and the minor version of that, and like it's like the 5-tone scale is the basis, and everything else is like a color tone or a leading tone or a harmonic tone to push from the pentatonic to a more diatonic major or minor kind of sound. And that's made me think a lot about kind of the ways that equal temperaments and like regular temperaments or those kind of structures interact functionally, because you can kind of move in between different ideas, and you can kind of shift them or almost modulate between certain ones. And I found that with 15, it makes it really presentable how to use a structure that's quite foreign, but um is really quite intuitive to use, and all of a sudden you can access all of these different kinds of sounds, and it almost feels like a tuning where there's no wrong notes, like everything, like I find a lot of the 7 limit ish intervals kind of have that thing where they all just kind of meld together, and everything together can sound nice. It's like with them, it's like it's more dense, but it also gives more space for some reason. That's been something I've been trying to understand, that it's like when you have more notes and less space, how at the same time it feels like you have more room. That it can be quite fascinating when density actually gives you more harmonic space to move around, or that like even having another quarter tone or like putting a fifth on a harmony that's already tense can almost lighten the harmony a bit by having a 3-2 or a 4-3 or a 5-4 somewhere in between in the density, especially if it's in just intonation. Then all of a sudden you have a dense harmony, but there's some really strong consonances within there, and then it it lets you do it without it being too strong of a dissonance.
Yeah, I'll bet it has to do with the amount of space, well, with the unique constructs that you get from a particular tuning. So like 15 tone equal temperament having that backbone of 5 tut, I think is a really strong feature of the tuning. And 15 tone layouts are actually I was way into them in the past, and actually there's a layout that I found that I think works really well for me because I'm usually wanting to play like certain diatonic scale subsets of Blackwood because 15 is not only really interesting because it's like maybe the farthest an average hand can grab an octave on a reformatted keyboard, but it also is not easy to come up with a layout for. And so like, you know, the porcupine layout, that's my profile picture, the 8 and the 7. Like that is probably the last odd layout one could really do before it's too hard to tell the black keys apart. And actually, I have a little life hack for that. I don't like to put stickers on the keys because then, you know, it's not professional or whatever. Like you're not visually using it to find your notes. But in the 15 tone, in that layout, I often find that I might confuse black keys because there's so many of them in one group. So there's actually two kinds of black keys I have from different keyboards, and one of them is a little bit more raised. And so I used the raised ones as like the center black key in each island, so that there's just this kind of little kind of hill in the middle that kind of helps me tell where things are. And if you explore alternative ideas like 5 times 3 is a layout like in that marimba, of course you'd have to provide some sort of visual cue since it's completely symmetrical, or you'd have to answer how you would deal with not having any asymmetry, like so you can see where you are. And the same goes for Blackwood 10. If Blackwood 10 is literally just alternating white and black the entire way, then that's
Yeah.
really hard to see anything.
Yeah.
I even tried Hansen 7 on my channel, which is not very commonly talked about in the context of 15 tone equal temperament. And I was able to play with it, and through sheer luck, certain shapes overlapped with kind of like what I wanted to do with certain chords. Like I used it for Dance of the Forest Lights, Zatla song. And like the B flat minor shape ended up being the same, just for no reason at all, like on a 12-tet piano on it than on a Hansen keyboard. I was talking with somebody else about 15 tone layouts and figured out that like a pseudo diatonic layout that's uneven would be really good. So you have the white keys be like in cent sizes like 0, 240, 400, 480, 720, what's the sixth? Whatever the just major sixth is and whatever the just major seventh is. Like kind of like Ptolemy's diatonic, but white keys, and then the half steps are still exactly there. But then the some of the whole steps have 2 black keys in between while others have 1, so that you visually can see both 3 steps and 2 steps of 15.
That would be interesting. I would for the three layer 5 tuning, I think that it could be something like the raised keys, like every set of the 3 5s could be like one is black, one is white, one is black, one is white, to kind of have, because when there's 5 you can know if you're in the middle one. Like with 5 you can count it. It's not too much to make a problem visually. But if you get like a whole stream of a keyboard in that, it definitely can, you can get lost pretty quick. But I think to have like I don't know, a white black key of each of the 5 ones could be that, because then you have the Blackwood scales that are just any 2 set of the 5s just going
Right.
up. For like a keyboard technique of like say, oh, if I'm in Blackwood major, then it's just like do 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 do, and
Yeah.
could be like there would be a huge maintenance of a technique, at least for how I would use that tuning on a piano type instrument. I think that because within like with either of the Blackwood 10s, I feel like you can, I don't know, really go into almost like the jazz world and like put a huge amount of extensions, or just kind of like, I don't want to
Yeah.
say like key mash, but you can kind of key mash in a way that like once you do it enough, you can kind of start to, it's like, okay, this shape is nice, this shape is nice, this shape goes into this one. Because I like the theoretical basis in instrument design, but then if I start to play, if the more I can forget about which notes they are and just like hear
Yeah.
them, hear the tension and resolution and that, and then because sometimes like I'd rather hear that's like, oh, this one has this and this and this, so I bet it can go down, but to not necessarily have that process being analytical or something that I'm thinking, but more intuitive. Like this sound I know that I can move up. This sound I can
Yes.
move down, and so on. So trying to think of ways that the keyboard shape would also be conducive to improvisation and playing comfortably in a tuning like that.
Extensions of Blackwood 10 make me really excited too, because you have like these 10 note diatonic like chords that have no chromatic clusters in them at all. It's very exciting. And I don't quite think standard notation is very prepared to label them, but they're extremely valid. Actually, I use one of those in my Aquatic Ambience cover, that song from Donkey Kong. There's a minor chord that I sing that's like C minor, but it's extended up to 9 notes of Blackwood 10 and like arpeggiated up. So it's very strange sounding.
Very cool. It made me think also, because with this requinto, 'cause we have with with the 9/8 and the 7/6, you almost kind of get a just intonation. Like, because when I was talking before about how I liked the interplay of those notes, because with the 7/6, I almost will sometimes just imagine that it's like the 1/240 of 15, because it's a similar kind of function and a similar kind of feeling playing it. So if you have the that's kind of my version of just intonation 580, and then you can extend that to the Blackwood if you want, or different like with having the 9/7, then you can go even. Oh, sorry, that's not right.
Wow.
I feel like it's a there's some of those kind of fundamental symmetrical structures that give us um nice layouts for visualizing how like the practicality on certain instruments. And I feel like 7 and 5 are really nice bases because they kind of have like the limits of how we can define a tone being like somewhere between, I don't know, 140 and 240 cents, that we can still kind of be like, yeah, that's still a tone. Sure, whatever of that. But they give us those structures that we can kind of base like a melodic or a harmonic fragment of or a structure like of 7 or 5. And then with like the with Blackwood extending that to 10 or 15 or 20, it kind of allows us to have like a growing structure of understanding where these notes are, and then applying that to adjust intonation tuning as well. We can still have those kind of mappings, and then be able to I don't know, tune something in just intonation. And because I never realized that I had kind of thought I like that I was playing this kind of like I would have played the 15-tone guitar. Like I'll use the same kind of Blackwood mapping that I would have used before, and then kind of going through the process of like, oh, what would that be? And it's not quite exactly is that either. It's kind of like a bit of a modified one. Maybe it would be something more like it's it got kind of changed, but it can maybe it's kind of like an adaptive Blackwood to some degree to that, or like it keeps that structure of like the I don't know, the whole tone to the 7/6 tone as kind of like the main symmetrical basis, because I think that that's a really nice sound, and that can kind of be moved around a lot as just like a structural fragment that we can use in a variety of tunings. That Blackwood really is like, it's that as like a microcosm.
Yeah,
uh,
absolutely. When you played the scale just now, it was cool because I could hear that it was Blackwood 10, like in a role based sense, but several impressions seemed different than what I usually get from Blackwood 10, especially when I hear it in 15. Like it sounded a little bit more angular than I'm used to hearing, more like 20 EDO Blackwood. Um, but I also didn't hear a lot of the character of like neutral seconds shining through, for example. So like in 1510,
yeah.
you really get that neutral secondy sound from adjacent steps. But I also worry the 15 tone Blackwood 10 scale, sometimes there's not a huge difference between 2/15ths of an octave and 1/15th of an octave, and you want to kind of have that difference, but you also want the chords to work out, so it's a little bit of a balancing act, and I feel like that's a very unique flavor of the scale you have right there. Would you want to talk a little bit about Redrick Sultan and kind of what music you played in that band and the status of it and things like that?
Sure. I started playing with Spencer and some other friends at when we were like 14 or 15, and I think by the time we released the first Redrick Sultan album, we were still with the same drummer, Jared Lajeunesse. But then by the and on those first albums, there was they weren't really microtonal, but by that time I had gotten a fretless bass, so I was putting a quarter tone in here or there just because I wanted to explore that freedom. And then on the next one, Trolling for Answers, it still wasn't microtonal, but there was a few tracks that were with a fretless guitar. And then there was one little section where it was in 13 Edo. There was an intro to one of the songs, but it was still in the realm of playing in 12. We still hadn't gotten microtonal instruments. And so when we did the album Fly as a Kite and an EP before that, we had started, like, we had gotten some instruments in 16 and 15 and 19 and 22. A majority of the stuff we did in 15 and 19, and with 15 we also did a bunch of open tunings, so which got kind of a nice tuning. It was like the guitar strings were tuned to an open major or minor chord, but then it was kind of mixed with the symmetries in 15 to make kind of a nice sound. Didn't I it I couldn't figure out how to do that in 19. With 19 it didn't sound as nice. But um, anyways, that was kind of our first exploration in songwriting in those tunings, exploring a bunch of tunings. I think only one tune, "Flying a Kite," ended up being in 16. And then one tune, I think, "Recurring Mimosa," was in 22. I think some other stuff we played live every once in a while, but I think that was the only one that ended up getting recorded. But after that album, we had disbanded. Spencer and I have still worked on some music since then. Spencer's working on an album as Terry Maple that will be, I think, all in 19. It's it seems like it's almost ready. I think he said that he's going to release it sometime next year, but it's coming there. We've also done some improvisations with we released a track with 15 tone guitar and violin, and then one with 17 tone guitar and flute. Um, we're hoping to do a longer collaboration sometime next year. I just finished making a grant application to do some tracks, kind of doing a comparison between 24 Edo and 19, and then allowing for that to kind of expand, like exploring the idea of third tone and quarter tone systems is kind of like a basis, because coming from a 12 tone basis, it's kind of like, I don't know, a lot of times when if I have a 19 tone guitar, people will say, "Oh, so those other ones are those like quarter tones?" And then it's like, well, they sort of are, but without going too far into what mean tone is, or they're actually third tones, or this is actually happening, it's easier to just say, yeah, there's something kind of like quarter tones, but in a way they're I don't know, they're like 13, 14 cents away from the 50-cent quarter tone, but they function in a different way. And that whole like range from 15 to 25 is kind of that third tone to quarter tone system and concept in the Euros. So I thought for my own learning of violin, because one of the things that I find really interesting is almost like making an eventual guide for different types of instruments, of like what kind of problems do you have to encounter with instrument design in playability, and whether it's with like a fretless instrument like a violin, or an instrument like a flute, or a stringed instrument like a guitar or a jarana or a quinto, or a keyed instrument like a piano or a marimba. What are the different technical challenges or visualization challenges that come up? That was like we were talking before about how the going up in the minor thirds or the different type of key layouts can give a strong kind of reference point for like I feel that if you can learn one microtonal tuning in a layout that can transmute to another, all of a sudden you've learned how to navigate three or four or five, or you can start to abstract different ideas. And then it's not something like you don't have to learn every tuning the way that you learned 12. You
Right.
just have to be able to modify some ideas from one to another. So I'd like to take that process on violin, partly in ear training practice as well, but also to really understand how it feels in the fingers to modify, to go from like the one tone of 19 to one tone of 12. Like um where does that difference fall in a technical standpoint, in an ear standpoint, in improvising with that instrument with a guitar, and then hopefully with that extending to something like 17 or 18 or that. So probably the next step will be going towards there.
Yeah.
Both of us have a bunch of songs and stuff that we'd like to produce. um so it's we'll see once we get into the studio. The last sessions have been more instrumental and improvised. But there's a good chance at some point, once we get more of the instruments really together, that we'll put together more of a composed album. But it's sometimes it seems like there's so many steps in between, like the composition and the exploration of trying to initiate those things, now that so many walls have been broken down with like, oh, I really want to get to these sounds and these sounds and these sounds. um
There's so many sounds. There's so many tunings. Yeah, I really like that you bring up how learning microtonal scales. It's not like learning 12-tone scales. Just because like if you have this small system to work in, then as a theory nerd, your obsession would be with figuring out every scale you could have. Um and kind of knowing, if you see a particular scale, what aesthetic it fits in, what other scales can work around it. And you can acquire uh those routines kind of as general skills in other microtonal tunings, and you don't need things like exhaustive lists. um and so hopefully, as microtonality continues to get more popular, people begin to realize that that's not really what's necessary. I think it's just a bit tricky because it's like we tell people in 12 tone equal temperament, oh, learn all your scales, then you've got all this information at your fingertips and it becomes easier. It becomes like speaking a language. And once you've sort of done that in 12, it's like the act of starting to do it in another tuning is enough to get you to a place where you could play in a scale instead of actually memorizing all the scales. It's more like the fact that you memorized all the scales in a tuning gets you ready for um just being more fluid with scales that you might encounter in general. Like it's a little bit complicated, I think, to explain.
uh yeah, once you've gone through the process, then modifying it a little bit is just so you know the process. Like, okay, here's kind of a scale, the technique's a bit different. Just like give her for a few days until it's there, or find some way of to mm, compartmentalize this concept and then go with that. And I feel through that improvisation becomes really really powerful and interesting, and thinking about things in terms of those kind of symmetries, improvising within a tuning, and just feeling them out can I think that we have a lot more understanding of the different tunings than we'd like to give ourselves credit for, because I think that we can get accustomed to a wildly new tuning quite quickly. And that's yeah, it's not as big of an issue as we'd like to think it is. So I think that trying to find some ways to guide those by an instrument, and especially working on the idea of instrument design and where the instruments can facilitate those ideas a bit easier. And then especially for instruments like flutes or saxophones or stringed instruments to find ways to introduce those into the music in a way that's less threatening. So I think that's going to be one of the next things with like post Redrick Sultan collaborations. Like the next project I want to do actually is released an excerpt of a new piece today called Las Mujeres de Neder, with a project I'm working on called Borders Fronteras. And so that one's using a 23 limit Harana, using the whole 23 limit O-tonal series, but also with a bunch of violins together with it. So I think that the next project that I want to work on will be taking one of these Haranas or requintos and using like the bass tracks. I didn't show you the Harana that I have here, just to show you the difference of like the strummed instruments. So this is like the cousin of. So this one's the quarter tone one. I wanted to find one that I could play in 12 for other practical purposes of life, but also that I felt like with this much time spent in microtonal music that I had to see what the actual quarter tones was about to be able to talk about it. And I found that there's a lot more interesting things that I didn't expect. But anyways, I think that one of the next steps will be recording improvisations on this one and the 23 limit Harana and maybe another one, recording them with violins and flutes and maybe voice, and then having that to be a way of collaborating with Spencer or a bigger group, and starting to produce longer compositions or pieces in that sense, now that I started to find more rhythmic ways to make basses and other ways to start layering the instruments on top of each other. So I think that will be like the segue to the next process of more compositions or more songs or collaborations, or all of the things going into that direction will be something along those lines.
Well, thanks for sharing those exciting tidbits with us. Do you have any other instruments in the room that you would like to show us?
I do. This is one of the flutes that I've talked about. This is called a tambin. This is from the Fulani in West Africa.
Wow.
So it's got 3 holes and it has quite an insane range. And the tuning often ends up having a neutral second and a neutral third. So sometimes it'll range anywhere between like a major, a minor, a neutral kind of Rast McCormick scale to like something near like a tetrachord, like dividing the fifth into 4 parts, or a 7 equal, but a 7 equal with usually at least the perfect fifth, sometimes the perfect fourth. But every instrument kind of varies in tunings. I measured a few of them that I had and found that the second usually falls around 140 to 150 cents, but up to 180. The third, I think the lowest thirds were around maybe 340, but up to like 410. And
Mm.
then the fourths were anywhere between like 500 cents and I think even up to 630. So they have quite a big range, but it seems like the ideal tuning kind of has I don't know, like the 140 to 160 cents and the 340 to 360 cents. With those as well, it gives a lot of freedom to micro adjust the intervals to become major or minor, like having that neutral middle section on the flute gives a lot of freedom, because with a bit of pressure or a bit of changing the tuning, you can play in a major or a minor with the other instruments and kind of tune on the fly. Um, so this will be the main flute that I'll be using for the recordings, and see how that goes. Try to find some other ways, and I mean with the open holes, you can. It's still a bit not the strongest tone with the half open hole, but there's a lot of ways of playing with the tuning, and especially in tunings like um 17 or in other things that kind of have a neutral flavor of that. It's so far it's been able to work well with a variety of different instruments. So
So this is how you played that song in 17.
yes, it was with this.
I
This
see.
was used with 17, and it worked out quite good. And especially playing with Spencer, who has 17 quite intuitively, and with bending the notes and adjusting the tuning and all of that, we were able to communicate with between the variations of the instruments as well. And I guess recognizing as well that just because the guitar's in 17 doesn't mean that we have to stick to something that's like really fascistly 17, that a nice basis of anything that's kind of close, that retune a string a little bit, bend a note a bit, and then we get this a colorful basis that allows us to play with those ideas, but also extend it, play the fifths perfect if we want, bend something to like a nice 5/4, play with the symmetries, or go outside of the tuning and just like let the instrument give us possibilities um that are around there. So experimenting with that with this. When we have the sessions are a lot longer. I just kind of edited one track of maybe 10 from each of those. So I'd like to listen to those and edit them, and maybe that'll be another album of stuff that is on the table. We did some improvisations the last time with the 23 limit. We have a pair, like one Harana, one requinto. Those are in Canada right now. They're with Spencer right now, so I can't show them today. But we
Hmm.
did a session with those as well. So that's the next on the list to release of our collaboration. So there's maybe 3 albums worth of material, or one long album of those improvisations that just need the time to be edited and mixed and shared. But yeah, these are the instruments. I have a new channel on YouTube. It's the same one, but on Instagram I've called it Nueva Armonia, like new harmony, to try to put forth some ideas of just like mini tutorials of things that I think about microtonal music. That's like, hey, this was something cool that I realized today. This is something the other night I was thinking about 24, and I realized that because before, when conceiving it, it's like, oh yeah, there's a note between each note. But then I realized that every note that was in 12 now has 2 equal parts as well, because now 1 to 12 is now 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So it's like, so the fourth has 2 equal parts. The fifth has 2 equal parts. The major sixth has 2 equal parts. This major seventh has 2 equal parts. And it's
Yeah.
like, that's super cool to know as well. That, and then just to realize other, I don't know, other things that appear in some scales that who knows who will be like, that's really cool, I want to use that for a piece. And all of those things are always coming.
So what's the best place for people to listen to your music, do you think?
I think I have the most music on my YouTube channel, which I think is called Noah Jordan or Noah Dean Jordan. And then I have a couple Instagram channels which also have music as well. But on YouTube, I think it's the most complete and most focused in music. I think everything ends up on there. And then on Spotify and streaming and Bandcamp, I upload everything there as well. So if you find, I think on Spotify and Tidal, I think it's Noah Dean Jordan, and then that has all of the albums to listen to, and then expand from there.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your instruments and musical background with us. This will be a really fascinating episode to pore over. I certainly got a lot out of it.
But thanks so much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure talking to you and talking through a bunch of things, reflecting a bunch of things I thought about this, and getting your view and your experience on a bunch of similar things and the same things. So it's been great.
Yeah. Well, adios then.
Yeah, thank you, Steven. I'll see you next time.
All right, bye-bye. Thanks so much for listening to Now and Zen, the podcast about microtonal and Zen harmonic music. If you'd like to support us, you can spread the word about the podcast, leave a positive review, or support us on Patreon. A big thanks to all our patrons, our Zen harmonic patrons, as well as our Zen harmonic gods. The Zen harmonic gods are Naren Rattan, Mike Battaglia, Adam Freese, Matthew Sheeran, Vincenzo Sicarella, Hector McGuffin, Christopher Bailey, Leland O. Weigel, Amy Coleman, Jill Weigel, and Tina Harmon Carteau. Catch you next time on Now and Zen. The piece you're currently listening to is also from Noah's latest album, and the title is Te Quiero Verde.